There are moments in life when danger does not announce itself with noise or violence, but with kindness, familiarity, and carefully rehearsed smiles. The most dangerous traps are never forged from iron, they are shaped from expectation. They are built patiently, plank by plank, with the assumption that you will walk forward without questioning the ground beneath your feet. And often those who lay such traps are convinced not only of their cleverness, but of your blindness. They watched you closely. They learned your patterns, your loyalties, your habits of mercy. They studied your silences and mistook them for ignorance. They assumed that because you did not shout, you did not see. Because you did not resist, you did not understand. And in their certainty they grew careless. They forgot that restraint is not the same as weakness, and trust does not cancel perception. The trap was perfect, at least on paper. Every angle accounted for, every reaction anticipated. They prepared the stage believing they knew the script of your life better than you did. What they failed to understand is that wisdom often arrives quietly, not with fanfare, but with a subtle unease that refuses to be ignored. A pause in the heart, a whisper in the conscience, a question that will not go away. You felt it before you could explain it. Not fear, but clarity, a sudden sharpening of the world, as though the fog lifted just enough to reveal what had always been there. Conversations began to sound rehearsed. Gestures became exaggerated. Promises arrived too easily. The kindness felt rushed, as if it were trying to outrun the truth. And in that moment, something ancient within you awakened, the instinct to stop walking forward simply because the path appeared familiar. It is a strange thing realizing that survival does not always require escape, but awareness. You did not need to expose them. You did not need to confront the snare or announce your discovery. The most powerful move was stillness. You simply stepped aside. You withdrew your expectations, your access, your emotional investment. And when you did, the trap, so carefully prepared, stood empty, revealing itself in its full, embarrassing nakedness. This is the part few understand. Traps rely on participation. They collapse without a willing victim. The moment you saw clearly, the entire structure lost its purpose. The patience they exercised to harm you now worked against them, for time only sharpened your discernment. Their plan required urgency from you, panic, haste, but you chose thought, you chose distance, you chose silence. There is a quiet dignity in realizing that you were never meant to be destroyed by what was set before you. Some trials exist not to wound, but to awaken. You walked away not because you were lucky, but because your soul had matured enough to recognize the pattern. What once would have entangled you now merely educated you, and that knowledge cannot be taken back. Those who build traps often cannot imagine a world in which they fail. When their designs unravel, they do not learn humility, they learn confusion. They replay events endlessly, searching for the moment they lost control, never suspecting that the flaw was never in the timing, but in their assumptions. They underestimated the quiet strength of discernment, and now, having seen what was hidden, you do not return to the same innocence, but to a deeper clarity. You move differently. You listen more closely. You no longer mistake familiarity for safety, nor charm for truth. The ground beneath your feet feels solid again, not because danger no longer exists, but because you have learned how to see. Some traps are avoided by speed, others by courage, but the most dangerous ones are escaped only by wisdom. And wisdom, once gained, leaves no visible scars, only a steadier walk, a clearer gaze, and the calm certainty that not every open door was meant to be entered. The most dangerous traps are rarely announced by threat or hostility. They do not arrive with raised voices or open opposition. They come dressed in the ordinary, wrapped in familiarity, and softened by reassurance. They look like paths you have walked before, conversations you have had many times, and faces you believe you already understand. This is precisely why they work. A trap that looks dangerous would never succeed. It would warn you away. But a trap that looks safe invites you to step forward willingly. Familiarity has a strange power over the human mind. What we recognize feels harmless, even when it is not. We assume that because something has never hurt us before, it never will. We trust patterns instead of examining motives. And so the trap is constructed not from cruelty but from routine. It is built out of habits you already have, expectations you already carry, and assumptions you no longer question. The designer of such a snare knows that you are more likely to lower your guard around what feels normal than around what feels new. Often, the trap is not meant to attack you directly. Its purpose is to lead you gently into a position where resistance feels awkward or even immoral. You are nudged, not pushed. The invitation sounds reasonable. The timing feels convenient. The request appears small enough to ignore your instincts. By the time you realize something is wrong, you are expected to believe that stepping back would be rude, dramatic, or unjustified. The trap succeeds by making escape feel socially or emotionally costly. There is also comfort woven into these designs. You are offered understanding, validation, or belonging. You are made to feel seen in just the right way. The trap does not deny your needs. It exploits them. It knows that people are most vulnerable not when they are weak, but when they are hopeful. Hope lowers defenses more effectively than fear ever could. And so the danger arrives smiling, patient, and unhurried. What makes this kind of trap especially lethal is that it relies on your cooperation. You are not dragged into it, you walk in by choice. Each step feels justified. Each decision feels minor. Nothing seems drastic enough to stop and reassess. The harm is gradual, almost polite, and when the consequences finally begin to appear, they are framed as accidents, misunderstandings, or your own fault. After all, no one forced you to enter. This is why wisdom is not merely intelligence, but attentiveness. It requires the courage to question what feels comfortable. It asks you to notice when something familiar suddenly begins to demand more than it gives. A safe path does not require you to silence your inner warning system. A genuine invitation does not punish hesitation. When comfort insists on speed and familiarity demands surrender, something has already gone wrong. Seeing such a trap in time does not make you suspicious of everything. It makes you honest about patterns. You learn that safety is not proven by repetition, but by consistency of truth. What is safe today should not become threatening tomorrow simply because you asked for clarity. What is good should withstand examination. And when it does not, the illusion breaks. Escaping a familiar trap is not dramatic. It is often quiet, almost anticlimactic. You simply stop participating in something that no longer aligns with what you see. There is no explosion, no final confrontation, only the calm realization that what once felt safe no longer deserves your presence, and that realization is not a loss, but a release. Those who plan harm rarely begin by sharpening weapons, they begin by observing kindness. They watch how you treat others, how quickly you forgive, how often you give the benefit of the doubt. They notice that you assume sincerity before deceit, and goodwill before malice. And instead of respecting these qualities, They interpret them as vulnerabilities. In their minds, compassion is not strength, it is an opening. Kindness, when misunderstood, becomes a blueprint for manipulation. Every generous impulse is studied. Every boundary you once relaxed is remembered. Your patience becomes predictable. Your empathy becomes a tool. They learn not who you are, but how you respond. And once your responses are mapped, they believe they can guide your actions simply by pressing the right emotional buttons. What they fail to understand is that kindness does not mean the absence of perception. Many people who choose gentleness do so not because they are unaware of darkness, but because they have already seen enough of it. Silence is not always ignorance. Sometimes it is restraint. Mercy is not blindness, it is discipline. But those who lack inner depth cannot imagine such distinctions. They assume that because they themselves would miss the signs, you must be missing them too. This miscalculation is where their confidence grows. They begin to overplay their hand. They grow bolder in their assumptions. They believe you are unaware because you have not reacted. They confuse your composure with confusion, and in doing so, they expose themselves. For the person who sees clearly does not always speak immediately. Sometimes awareness chooses patience over exposure, observation over reaction. There is a quiet intelligence in allowing people to reveal themselves fully. When you do not rush to correct, accuse, or defend, patterns have time to emerge. Inconsistencies surface, intentions become clearer, and the very behaviors meant to control you begin to betray the one using them. Kindness, when paired with discernment, becomes a mirror. Those who wish to deceive often end up revealing more than they intend. The tragedy for the manipulator is that they mistake moral choice for mental limitation. They believe that because you could exploit others but choose not to, you must lack the capacity. They do not understand that self-control is not the absence of power, but the mastery of it. And so they operate under false assumptions, building strategies upon foundations that were never real. When the moment of realization arrives, it is often subtle. You see the pattern not as an attack, but as a shift. Something no longer aligns. The tone changes. The expectations grow heavier. The kindness you offered freely begins to feel demanded. And that is when clarity replaces tolerance. Not with anger, but with distance. Withdrawing from such dynamics does not require bitterness. You do not need to harden your heart to protect it. You simply recognize that kindness without boundaries becomes permission, and mercy without wisdom becomes surrender. Seeing this truth does not diminish your compassion, it refines it. Those who thought they were exploiting blindness are often left confused when their influence fades. They cannot understand how control slipped away without confrontation. What they never realize is that it was never their cleverness that sustained the connection. It was your choice. And once that choice is withdrawn, their entire design collapses quietly, without drama, leaving only the unmistakable evidence that kindness was never the weakness they believed it to be. Silence is one of the most misunderstood languages in human experience. Those who speak it fluently are often judged by those who fear it. In a world that rewards immediate reaction, loud certainty, and constant explanation, silence is quickly labeled as ignorance or indecision. But silence, when chosen deliberately, is rarely empty. It is filled with observation, weighing, and restraint. It is not the absence of thought, but the refusal to waste it. When you do not respond as expected, people project their own limitations onto you. They assume that if you have not spoken, you have not understood. If you have not protested, you have not noticed. If you have not defended yourself, you must be unaware of what is happening. This assumption comforts them. It allows them to continue their behavior without resistance, believing they are operating unseen. Yet silence often means the opposite. It means everything is being noticed. There is a particular strength required to remain quiet while fully aware. It demands confidence that does not rely on validation. It requires the patience to allow reality to unfold without interference. Many speak too quickly because they fear being misunderstood, forgotten, or outmaneuvered. Silence accepts the risk of being underestimated and turns it into an advantage. When others believe you are not paying attention, they stop disguising their intentions. Watchfulness thrives in quiet. When you are not busy explaining yourself, you are free to listen. When you are not reacting, you are free to observe patterns. Words can distract from truth. Silence often sharpens it. People reveal more in what they assume you will ignore than in what they think you are judging. They grow careless. They repeat themselves. They contradict their earlier claims. And slowly, without effort, the truth arranges itself in front of you. Silence also protects clarity. Speaking too soon often locks you into positions you have not fully examined. Once words are released, they demand consistency even when new information emerges. Silence allows flexibility. It keeps your understanding fluid, responsive, alive. It gives you room to change your mind without having to justify it publicly, and that freedom is invaluable when navigating situations shaped by hidden motives. Those who mistake silence for ignorance often reveal their own need for control. They require feedback to calibrate their behavior. They depend on reactions to measure influence. When those reactions are withheld, they grow uneasy. Their attempts become more obvious, more forceful. The mask slips, not because you challenged it, but because you did not. Silence denies them the reassurance they seek. This does not mean silence is passive. It is active restraint. It is choosing not to speak until speech serves truth rather than emotion. It is allowing understanding to mature before acting upon it. The person who remains silent is not asleep. They are alert in a deeper way. They are reading the room, not the script. They are listening for what is unsaid, not distracted by what is declared. Eventually, silence reaches a natural turning point. Not every truth must be spoken, but every truth eventually demands a response, sometimes in action rather than words. When that moment arrives, silence gives way to movement. And because it was preceded by clarity rather than impulse, the action is precise. No energy is wasted. No explanations are owed. Those who once believed silence meant ignorance are often stunned by the accuracy of the response when it finally comes. They cannot reconcile their assumption with the outcome. They never realize that quiet was not confusion, it was preparation. Manipulation does not thrive in calm, it feeds on urgency. The faster you are pushed to decide, the less time you have to think. This is no accident. Pressure is not a byproduct of manipulation, it is its primary tool. When someone insists that something must happen now, immediately before you can reflect, they are not appealing to reason. They are attempt to outrun your discernment. Urgency creates a false sense of importance. It convinces you that delay equals danger, that hesitation equals loss. Under its influence, ordinary choices feel catastrophic. You are told that if you do not act now, an opportunity will disappear forever, trust will be broken, or disaster will follow. In reality, what is being threatened is not your well-being, but the manipulator's control. Healthy situations allow time. Truth does not fear inspection. Genuine intentions can withstand questions, pauses, and reconsideration. When something is real, it does not evaporate under scrutiny. But manipulation cannot afford delay. It relies on momentum. It needs you moving forward before your intuition has time to speak clearly. And so speed becomes a weapon. Notice how urgency often disguises itself as concern. I'm only telling you this now because I care. This is your last chance. If you really trusted me, you wouldn't hesitate. These phrases are designed to bypass thought and provoke emotion. They frame reflection as betrayal and caution as weakness. In doing so, they invert wisdom, making recklessness appear virtuous. The body often recognizes manipulation before the mind does. A tightening in the chest, a sense of being cornered, a feeling that you are being hurried away from your own better judgment. These signals are not irrational, they are protective. Urgency demands that you ignore them. Discernment invites you to slow down and listen. Choosing to pause is a quiet act of defiance. It disrupts the entire structure of manipulation. When you refuse to be rushed, you reclaim authority over your own decisions. You introduce space where pressure expected compliance. And in that space, clarity emerges. Questions form. Inconsistencies become visible. What once felt urgent begins to look exaggerated, even absurd. Those who rely on urgency often react poorly to delay. They grow impatient. Their tone shifts. Their language becomes sharper. This reaction is revealing. Someone with good intentions welcomes careful thought. Someone with hidden motives resents it. Time exposes which is which. Simply asking for space can tell you more than any explanation ever could. Urgency also narrows perspective. It forces you to focus on immediate outcomes while ignoring long-term consequences. Manipulation thrives when the future is kept blurry. Slowing down allows you to widen your view. You begin to ask not only what will happen now, but what this choice will demand later. And many traps collapse under that question alone. There is courage in refusing haste. It requires trusting your inner sense over external pressure. It may disappoint others. It may disrupt plans. But it preserves integrity. When you move at your own pace, you are no longer easy to steer. You become anchored rather than reactive. The moment urgency loses its grip, manipulation loses its power. What remains is choice, calm, deliberate, and yours alone. And in that calm, the path that once seemed unavoidable often reveals itself as optional, even unnecessary. Discernment rarely arrives with drama. It does not crash into the mind like fear or shout like anger. More often, it enters quietly, almost politely, as a subtle unease that refuses to leave. It is the sense that something is slightly misaligned, even when everything appears correct on the surface. Many ignore it because it does not present evidence, only atmosphere. Yet this quiet discomfort is one of the mind's most honest signals. Fear demands immediate escape. Discernment asks for attention. Fear overwhelms. Discernment sharpens. The two are often confused, but they move in opposite directions. Fear clouds judgment and pushes you toward reaction. Discernment clears the mind and invites observation. It does not say, run. It says, look again. And that difference matters. This unease often appears when words and actions no longer match. Nothing is overtly wrong, yet nothing feels entirely right. Promises sound generous, but carry weight. Kind gestures feel timed rather than natural. Compliments arrive with expectations attached. You cannot yet explain why, and that makes the feeling easy to dismiss. After all, modern thinking demands proof before trust and distrust before doubt. But discernment does not operate on proof alone, it operates on coherence. The mind, trained to value politeness and harmony, often tries to silence this inner signal. You tell yourself you are overthinking, you accuse yourself of being suspicious or ungrateful, you remind yourself of past goodwill. In doing so, you override a quiet intelligence that has been shaped by experience, pattern recognition, and intuition. Discernment is not paranoia, it is memory applied in real time. What makes this discomfort so valuable is that it asks nothing of you except patience. It does not require confrontation or accusation, it simply asks you to wait, to watch, to allow more information to surface before committing yourself further. And this waiting often reveals what urgency was meant to hide. The longer you sit with discernment, the clearer the picture becomes. Those who rely on deception fear this pause. They depend on your certainty, either positive or negative. What unsettles them is neutrality. When you neither trust fully nor reject outright, they lose leverage. Discernment denies them immediate access. It creates space, and in that space, truth tends to rise. This quiet clarity also protects you from self-betrayal. Many people are harmed not because they are deceived, but because they ignore what they sense in order to maintain peace or avoid discomfort. Discernment offers a way to honor your inner knowledge without hostility. You do know. You have to accuse anyone of wrongdoing to take yourself seriously. You simply adjust your position. Over time, discernment grows more confident. The unease sharpens into understanding. Patterns repeat, inconsistencies stack. What was once a vague feeling becomes a clear recognition. And when that happens, action becomes simple, not impulsive but obvious. You know what no longer deserves your time, your trust, or your presence. Listening to discernment does not make life smaller. It makes it more honest. It teaches you that wisdom does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers, patiently waiting to see if you are willing to listen before it needs to speak again. Rehearsed kindness has a distinct quality. It is polished, timely, and strangely exhausting to receive. Unlike genuine care, which flows naturally and adapts to circumstance, rehearsed kindness arrives with precision. It appears exactly when needed, lasts exactly as long as required, and often disappears the moment it has served its purpose. At first glance, it looks generous. Over time, it feels transactional. Exaggerated concern is often mistaken for deep compassion. It is louder, more visible, and more dramatic than ordinary care. It asks many questions, offers many assurances, and emphasizes its own effort. Yet true concern does not need to announce itself repeatedly. It does not remind you how much it is doing. It simply does what is right and remains steady, even when there is nothing to gain. One of the earliest signs of hidden intent is when kindness feels performative rather than responsive. It does not listen, it anticipates. It does not adapt, it insists. The help offered does not match the need, but the narrative. You begin to sense that the person is more invested in being seen as kind than in actually understanding you. And that difference, though subtle, is revealing exaggerated. Concern also has a way of positioning you as dependent. It frames you as fragile, confused, or incapable of managing without guidance. While appearing supportive, it quietly undermines your autonomy. You are helped in ways that reduce your confidence rather than restore it. Advice arrives uninvited. Protection becomes control. Care becomes supervision. This form of kindness often resists boundaries. When you attempt to step back or assert independence, it reacts with offense or guilt. You are reminded of all that has been done for you. Gratitude is expected not as appreciation, but as compliance. The moment kindness demands repayment, it ceases to be kindness at all. Another sign lies in inconsistency. Rehearsed kindness is generous when watched and absent when unseen. It performs well in public but falters in private. It is enthusiastic at the beginning of relationships and strangely fatigued when effort is no longer rewarded. Genuine care deepens with familiarity. Manipulative care peaks early and declines once trust is secured. Exaggeration often masks impatience. When concern feels urgent, insistent, or emotionally charged beyond the situation, it may be attempting to accelerate closeness or decision-making. You are pushed to accept help quickly, to trust rapidly, to open yourself before discernment has time to operate. This speed is not for your benefit, it is for control. Recognizing these signs does not require cynicism, it requires attention. You begin to notice how you feel after interactions, energized or drained, clear or confused, supported or subtly diminished. The body often registers what the mind tries to rationalize away. Rehearsed kindness leaves you indebted. Genuine care leaves you strengthened. As awareness grows, the exaggerated gestures lose their effect. You stop mistaking intensity for sincerity. You no longer confuse visibility with depth. Without accusation or drama, you begin to recalibrate access. You accept help selectively. You listen without surrendering judgment. You appreciate kindness without handing over authority. When rehearsed kindness is no longer rewarded, it often reveals its true nature. The warmth cools, the concern fades, and in that change, clarity completes its work. What once appeared generous is seen accurately, not as evil, but as conditional. And knowing that difference allows you to protect what is most valuable, your trust, your autonomy, and your inner balance. Wisdom often reveals itself not in what you do, but in what you refuse to do. When expectations press in from every side, when reactions are anticipated, emotions are provoked, and responses are silently demanded, the most disruptive act can be restraint. To pause where others expect haste is not indecision. It is discernment choosing its footing. In that pause, you reclaim authorship of your own movement. Reactivity feels natural because it promises relief. To answer quickly, to defend immediately, to clarify at once, these actions soothe discomfort. They quiet the tension of uncertainty, but they also surrender control. When you react on cue, you confirm the script others have prepared for you. Wisdom interrupts that script. It refuses to move simply because the moment is loud. Expectation is a subtle force. It leans on habit, reputation, and emotional debt. You are expected to respond as you always have, to forgive as you always did, to explain as you always do. And when you don't, confusion follows. That confusion is not your failure. It is evidence that the expectation was never about mutual understanding, but predictability. Restraint creates space where patterns can be seen. When you do not rush to fill silence, others fill it for you. They elaborate, they justify, they reveal. The story grows longer than it need, to be, and in that excess, truth leaks out. Wisdom understands this and waits. It lets the weight of words settle before deciding what they mean. There is also courage in disappointing expectation. It requires trusting your inner compass over external approval. People accustomed to your immediate compliance may interpret restraint as coldness or defiance. Yet wisdom is not obligated to preserve comfort at the cost of clarity. It understands that harmony built on self-betrayal is fragile and short-lived. Choosing thought over reaction preserves energy. Emotional reactions are expensive, they consume focus and drain resolve. Wisdom conserves. It asks fewer questions aloud and listens more carefully to answers that arrive unprompted. It recognizes that every response is an investment, and not every situation deserves one. In restraint, you discover the difference between urgency and importance. Many things feel pressing but matter little. Wisdom separates noise from necessity. It does not deny emotion, it places it in context. Feelings are acknowledged without being crowned as commanders. They inform, but they do not rule. This measured approach also protects integrity. When you react impulsively, you risk saying what you later must defend. Wisdom speaks when words can stand without apology. Silence becomes a form of precision, a way of ensuring that when you do move, the movement aligns with what you truly know. Those who depend on your predictable reactions often grow restless in the presence of restraint. Their impatience surfaces, their tone shifts. They attempt new tactics, and with each attempt they make their intentions clearer. Wisdom watches without interference, allowing revelation to complete itself. In time, restraint simplifies choice. What once felt complex becomes obvious. The path forward no longer demands explanation, only alignment. And when you act, the action carries weight, not because it is loud, but because it is exact. Confrontation is often mistaken for strength. It appears decisive, bold, and honest. But awareness possesses a quieter authority. It does not argue, it understands, and understanding, once achieved, dissolves many conflicts before they begin. You do not need to accuse a trap in order to escape it. You only need to see it. Awareness changes posture. Without announcing anything, you begin to move differently. You share less. You commit more selectively. You ask fewer questions and offer fewer explanations. Nothing dramatic occurs, yet the dynamic shifts. What once relied on your engagement now struggles to function without it. The trap does not spring because there is no longer weight on the mechanism. This is the elegance of awareness. It removes participation. Many harmful structures survive only through consent, emotional, psychological, or habitual. When awareness withdraws that consent, the structure stands exposed and ineffective. There is no need to tear it down, it collapses under its own design. Confrontation invites defense. Awareness invites clarity. When you confront, you give the other person a role to play. Denial, justification, counterattack. Awareness denies them that stage. It does not seek validation, it does not ask permission to leave. It simply stops providing access where access is misused. There is also a personal cost to confrontation. It can entangle you further, tying your energy to outcomes you cannot control. Awareness conserves that energy. It accepts that not everyone will understand your withdrawal, and it makes peace with that. Explanation is replaced by alignment. You no longer need others to agree with your perception in order to honor it. Seeing clearly also frees you from resentment. When you understand the mechanism, you stop taking its operation perso. Nally, you recognize patterns rather than villains. This does not excuse harm, but it prevents harm from defining you. Awareness shifts focus from what was attempted to what was learned. The trap's greatest weakness is exposure, not public exposure, but internal recognition. Once you see how it works, it loses its mystery. Its timing, its pressure points, its emotional leverage all become predictable, and predictability eliminates fear. What is understood can be avoided without drama. Awareness also refines future choices. You begin to notice similar patterns earlier, in subtler forms. You trust the first signal rather than waiting for confirmation through pain. This does not make you guarded, it makes you accurate. You remain open, but no longer unprotected. Those who set traps often expect reaction, anger, confrontation, pleading. When none arrives, they are left with the echo of their own intent. Confusion replaces control. They may never know exactly why the dynamic changed, only that it did, and that ignorance is not your responsibility to correct. In choosing awareness over confrontation, you preserve dignity, you leave without spectacle, you grow without announcement, and you step forward not as someone who escaped danger by force, but as someone who recognized it in time and quietly chose a better path. Every trap depends on access, not physical access, but emotional access, the quiet permission to influence how you feel, think, and respond. Force is rarely required when access is already granted. The most effective traps do not restrain the body, they entangle the heart and mind. They work because someone is allowed close enough to matter. Emotional access is given long before harm is done. It begins with trust, shared vulnerability, familiarity, and repeated interaction. None of these are wrong on their own. They are human necessities. But when access is ungwa, RDDD, it becomes leverage. The trap does not pull you in, it waits for you to step forward because connection has already been established. This is why manipulation often feels personal rather than violent. It does not attack from outside, it operates from within the relationship. It knows your language, your values, your soft spots. It understands what you fear losing and what you hope to preserve. And because of that understanding, it does not need to threaten. You threaten yourself on its behalf. Once emotional access is secured, subtle pressure becomes effective. Disappointment replaces demand. Silence replaces argument. Approval is withdrawn instead of force applied. You begin to adjust yourself preemptively, not because you are told to, but because you want to restore harmony. The trap tightens not through aggression, but through your own desire to keep things intact. What makes this especially dangerous is that it feels voluntary. You believe you are choosing, and in a sense you are, but within a narrowed field of options shaped by emotional consequence. The trap does not forbid alternatives, it makes them feel unbearable. It relies on your reluctance to hurt, disappoint, or disrupt. Understanding this shifts responsibility back to where power truly lies. The trap cannot function without sustained access. It needs your attention, your responsiveness, your emotional availability. The moment access is reduced, its influence weakens. This is why boundaries are so disruptive to manipulation. They do not argue, they limit. Reducing access does not require cruelty, it requires clarity. You begin to share less personal information. You stop explaining your internal world to those who misuse it. You respond more slowly. You no longer feel obligated to resolve emotions that are not yours to carry. These changes may appear small, but they dismantle the foundation of control. Emotional access is not revoked all at once. It recedes gradually as discernment grows. You become more selective about what reaches you and what does not. You realize that not every reaction deserves a response, and not every feeling requires validation from the same source. Your inner world becomes less exposed, more protected. Those who relied on access often react strongly when it is reduced. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant or cold. In truth, you have not changed your nature. You have refined your permissions. What they mourn is not connection, but influence. When emotional access is restored to its rightful place, earned, mutual, respectful, the trap dissolves. Without leverage, manipulation loses precision. It becomes clumsy, obvious, ineffective, and you begin to experience a new kind of freedom, the freedom of choosing connection without surrendering control. Attention is currency. Expectations are contracts. When you withdraw both, entire structures collapse without resistance. Many traps survive not because they are strong, but because they are fed. Attention fuels them. Expectations sustain them. Remove either, and the mechanism stalls. Expectation creates obligation. When others expect you to behave in a certain way, to react, to comply, to remain consistent, you feel pressure to meet that expectation. This pressure is often invisible yet powerful. It shapes behavior quietly, making deviation feel like betrayal or failure. A trap counts on this internal pressure more than any external force. Attention amplifies influence. What you focus on grows sharper, heavier, more significant. Traps thrive on being noticed, anticipated, managed. The more mental energy you give them, the more real they feel. Attention keeps you engaged long after harm begins. It convinces you that resolution lies in further involvement. Withdrawing attention does not mean denial. It means redirection. You stop rehearsing conversations that have not happened. You stop monitoring reactions that no longer matter. You stop anticipating outcomes designed to provoke anxiety. This shift feels uncomfortable at first because attention has become habitual. But habits can be broken. Expectations often keep people tethered to harmful dynamics. You expect change. You expect understanding. You expect reciprocity. And while expectation can be hopeful, it can also be imprisoning. When expectation persists despite evidence, it becomes a trap of its own, keeping you invested in what is no longer aligned with reality. Releasing expectation is not resignation, it is accuracy. You stop projecting potential onto patterns that have already revealed themselves. You accept what is, rather than waiting for what should be. In doing so, you free yourself from disappointment's cycle. When attention and expectation are withdrawn together, something remarkable happens. Silence spreads where tension once lived. The urgency fades, the emotional noise quiets. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel distant. This distance is not indifference, it is relief. The trap does not protest loudly when this happens. It simply stops functioning. Without attention, it cannot provoke. Without expectation, it cannot disappoint. You are no longer emotionally available for the role assigned to you. And without that role, the script collapses. Others may notice the shift before you fully do. They sense that something has changed. The dynamic no longer responds to familiar triggers. Attempts to re-engage may increase briefly, then falter. This is not because you fought back, but because you stepped back. Withdrawing attention is an act of self-respect. Withdrawing expectation is an act of wisdom. Together they restore autonomy. You no longer orbit someone else's behavior. You return to your own center, and in that center, clarity replaces tension. Choices simplify. Peace emerges, not because the world changed, but because you stopped feeding what was never meant to consume you. Clarity has a peculiar power. It reveals without accusing. It does not point a finger or raise its voice. It simply stands still long enough for reality to arrange itself honestly. When clarity enters a situation, deception loses its advantage, not because it is attacked, but because it can no longer hide behind confusion. Many people believe exposure requires confrontation. They think truth must be forced into the open through argument, evidence, or dramatic declaration. But clarity works differently. It does not chase lies, it outlasts them. Deception depends on distortion, distraction, and emotional fog. Clarity removes the fog, and once visibility is restored, lies appear fragile and incomplete. What makes clarity so effective is that it changes how you respond. You stop asking questions that were designed to confuse you. You stop accepting explanations that contradict themselves. You no longer argue about intent when behavior has already spoken clearly. This quiet shift in response exposes deception more thoroughly than accusation ever could. Deceptive dynamics often rely on your participation in doubt. You are encouraged to question your own perception, to second-guess what you saw, felt, or understood. Clarity interrupts this cycle. It trusts observation over reassurance. It values consistency over charm. And in doing so, it removes the emotional leverage deception requires. There is also a restraint inherent in clarity. It does not need to convince anyone else in order to function. You do not require agreement to withdraw trust. You do not need confession to change course. Clarity gives you permission to act on what you know without demanding validation. Dependence is deeply unsettling to those who rely on persuasion. When clarity is present, deception often reveals itself through excess. Explanations grow longer, justifications multiply, emotional appeals intensify. The effort to control perception increases because the usual shortcuts no longer work. This escalation is not evidence of truth, it is evidence of panic. Clarity remains calm while deception becomes restless. Another strength of clarity is that it preserves dignity. Accusation invites conflict. Defense invites counterattack. Clarity sidesteps both. You are no longer trying to win an argument. You are simply aligning your behavior with reality. This alignment speaks louder than any declaration. Clarity also protects you from bitterness. When you understand what is happening, resentment loses its grip. You stop personalizing behavior that follows a pattern. You see strategy where you once saw betrayal, limitation where you once assumed intent. This does not excuse harm, but it prevents harm from consuming your emotional life. The beauty of clarity is that it does not rush, it unfolds. Each interaction confirms or contradicts what you already sense. Over time, the picture becomes undeniable, and when that moment arrives, action feels inevitable rather than forced. You do not leave in anger, you step away in certainty. Those who depended on ambiguity find clarity threatening because it cannot be negotiated with. It does not argue terms, it does not bargain. It simply removes itself from what no longer aligns, and in that removal the truth stands exposed, not because it was dragged into the light, but because there is nowhere left for it to hide. Patience has a way of revealing what haste conceals. Those who plot harm often rely on precision and timing, believing they can maintain control if each step is executed carefully. But patience stretches time, and may exposes strain. The longer someone sustains deception, the more effort it requires, and effort breeds error. Carelessness rarely appears at the beginning. Early stages are polished, words are measured, behavior is controlled. But sustaining a false narrative demands constant attention. Every detail must be remembered. Every reaction must be anticipated. Over time, fatigue sets in. Small inconsistencies emerge. The mask slips, not all at once, but in fragments. Patience allows these fragments to accumulate. You do not interrupt the process. You do not correct prematurely. You let repetition do its work. Patterns repeat because they are habitual, and habits, when observed long enough, reveal their underlying motive. What was once subtle becomes predictable. Those who intend harm often mistake patience for passivity. They believe silence means success. They assume delay indicates ignorance or acceptance. This misinterpretation encourages overconfidence. And overconfidence is the seed of carelessness. It leads them to reveal more than intended, to relax precautions, to assume the outcome is already secured. Patience also shifts the balance of power. When you are not rushed, you are not easily steered. You watch how people behave when they think the outcome is guaranteed. Courtesy fades, discipline loosens. The truth emerges not under pressure but under comfort. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they are safe from consequence. Time tests consistency. Anyone can maintain an image briefly. Few can sustain it indefinitely. Patience exposes the difference between character and performance. You begin to notice which behaviors endure and which fluctuate. The fluctuation is telling. What is real remains stable. What is fabricated decays. This process requires restraint. The impulse to intervene, to clarify, to protect yourself immediately must be resisted. Patience is not inaction. It is delayed action informed by observation. It trusts that truth does not need assistance to surface. It needs space. Carelessness also appears when plans encounter unexpected variables. A question asked at the wrong time. A delay that disrupts sequence. A response that does not match expectation. These moments reveal adaptability or the lack of it. Those with genuine intent adjust naturally. Those with hidden agendas falter. Patience also protects you from premature judgment. It allows you to be certain rather than suspicious. When you act after patient observation, your decisions carry confidence. Doubt has already been resolved. You are not guessing, you are responding to evidence revealed through time. Eventually, the effort to maintain deception becomes unsustainable. Mistakes accumulate. Contradictions surface. What was hidden in precision is exposed in repetition, and when clarity finally arrives, it does so quietly, without shock. Patience does not merely reveal carelessness, it transforms waiting into understanding. And once understanding is complete, movement feels less like reaction and more like inevitability, steady, grounded, and free from regret. There is a popular belief that survival requires confrontation, that danger must be met head-on and overcome through force of will. This belief is comforting because it frames life as a series of battles with clear victories. But reality is more nuanced. Some threats are not defeated by advancing toward them, but by stepping aside and allowing them to miss their target entirely. Strength is not always found in forward motion. Sometimes it lives in refusal. Stepping aside is often mistaken for retreat. In truth, it is repositioning. It is the recognition that not every path placed before you was meant to be walked, and not every challenge deserves your energy. When you move forward, blindly you accept the terrain chosen by someone else. When you step aside, you reclaim choice. You choose where your effort belongs. Many traps depend on your momentum. They anticipate resistance, outrage, fear, or compliance, but always movement toward them. When you do not advance, the design falters, the pressure loses direction, the mechanism waits for weight that never arrives. What was built to capture you is left suspended, exposed, and purposeless. There is a quiet intelligence in stepping aside. It requires the humility to admit that progress is not always linear. We are taught to push through discomfort, to persist regardless of warning, yet wisdom knows the difference between endurance and self-endangerment. It recognizes when perseverance becomes participation in harm. Stepping aside also protects perspective. When you are locked in forward motion, your field of vision narrows. The goal eclipses the environment. You stop noticing what is happening around you. By pausing and shifting position, you regain a wider view. You see angles you missed before. You notice who benefits from your continued advance and who does not. This choice often feels unnatural at first. There is discomfort in resisting the urge to explain, to justify, to fight. The mind wants closure, resolution, triumph. Stepping aside offers none of these immediately. It offers ambiguity. But within that ambiguity is freedom. You are no longer bound to an outcome engineered by someone else. Those who expect your forward charge are often disoriented by your absence. They prepared for conflict, not indifference. They anticipated engagement, not withdrawal. Your silence, your stillness, your redirection, all become unpredictable. And unpredictability dissolves control. Stepping aside also preserves energy. Conflict consumes attention, emotion, and time. When you choose not to engage, you conserve resources for paths that nourish rather than deplete. This conservation is not weakness, it is stewardship. You are guarding what is valuable by refusing to spend it recklessly. There is also dignity in choosing peace over spectacle. Not every injustice requires a stage. Not every harm must be answered publicly. Some victories are private, known only to the person who avoided destruction by refusing the invitation to collide with it. In stepping aside, you allow consequences to unfold naturally. Without your involvement, systems reveal their instability. Without resistance, pressure collapses inward. You are no longer the object absorbing force, you become the space through which force passes harmlessly. Survival in this sense is not about overpowering danger, but outgrowing it. You move not because you are afraid, but because you are awake. And in that awakening, you discover that the strongest position is sometimes the one that was never attacked, because it was never there to begin with. Experience changes vision. What once appeared harmless now carries nuance. What once seemed generous now invites scrutiny. This shift is often misunderstood as bitterness, but bitterness hardens the heart, while perception sharpens it. Experience does not steal innocence, it transforms it into awareness. Innocence assumes alignment. It believes that words and intentions move together, that kindness signals safety, that familiarity guarantees goodwill. These assumptions are not foolish, they are human. They allow connection, trust, and hope, but they are incomplete. Experience does not negate these values, it teaches their limits. When innocence meets reality, the first response is often pain. Disillusionment wounds because it breaks expectation. Yet within that break, perception is born. You begin to notice patterns rather than promises. You pay attention to behavior rather than explanation. You learn that sincerity is shown not in intensity but in consistency. Perception does not make you suspicious of everyone. It makes you attentive to context. You no longer grant trust automatically, but you do not withhold it permanently either. Trust becomes responsive rather than assumed. It grows through evidence rather than sentiment. This evolution is quiet. There is no announcement that innocence has changed. Others may still see you as the same, kind, patient, open, but internally a recalibration has occurred. You listen more carefully. You move more deliberately. You no longer rush to fill gaps in understanding with optimism alone. What is lost in this process is not goodness, but naivety. And naivety, once shed, does not return. You cannot unsee patterns you have recognized. You cannot return to believing that all intentions are benign once you have witnessed how easily they can be shaped by self-interest. This is not cynicism, it is realism. Perception also grants resilience. When disappointment arrives again, as it inevitably will, it does not devastate in the same way. You are not shattered by surprise, because surprise no longer governs expectation. You adjust without collapsing. You respond without unraveling. There is compassion in this form of perception. You begin to understand limitations, yours and others. You see how fear, insecurity, and desire drive behavior. This understanding does not excuse harm, but it contextualizes it. You stop expecting from people what they have not shown themselves capable of giving. Perception also restores agency. Innocence waits to be guided. Awareness chooses direction. You no longer drift into situations because they feel familiar. You enter deliberately, knowing the cost. And when the cost is too high, you leave without drama. Those who benefit from unexamined innocence often resist your growth. They see the change even if they cannot name it. Your boundaries feel unfamiliar. Your pauses feel inconvenient. But this resistance is not a sign of your failure. It is evidence of your evolution. What remains after innocence transforms is something sturdier, discernment tempered by compassion. You are not hardened, you are grounded. You can still hope, still care, still connect, but now with eyes open. And in that openness, life becomes less about avoiding pain and more about choosing truth. You are no longer protected by ignorance, but by understanding, and that understanding walks beside you quietly, not shouting warnings, but guiding each step with steady clarity. Those who build traps often suffer from a dangerous illusion, the belief that control, once achieved, is permanent. They assume that influence, once secured, will remain intact simply because it has worked before. This illusion breeds arrogance, and arrogance dulls perception. It convinces people that outcomes are guaranteed, that resistance has been neutralized, and that vigilance is no longer required. Control thrives on certainty. The moment someone believes they have mastered a situation, they stop paying attention to its subtle changes. They rely on habit instead of awareness. They repeat the same strategies expecting the same results. And in doing so, they overlook the quiet shifts that signal loss of control. The person they thought they understood has changed. The responses they anticipated no longer arrive. The familiar levers stop working. This is where miscalculation begins. Those who depend on dominance expect obedience, reaction, or engagement. When none comes, they misinterpret the silence as delay rather than withdrawal. They believe they still have time. They assume the structure is intact because it has not yet collapsed. What they fail to realize is that collapse rarely announces itself in advance, arrogance, blinds people to their own dependency. They forget that control requires cooperation, influence requires attention, power requires consent. When these are quietly removed, there is no dramatic moment, only absence, and absence is difficult to diagnose. It cannot be confronted or argued with. It simply exists. Those who are losing control often react by tightening their grip. They repeat old tactics with greater intensity. They become louder, more insistent, more emotional. This escalation is revealing. It exposes not strength, but insecurity. Confidence does not rush, panic does. The shift in behavior signals that something has gone wrong, even if they cannot name it. Another common mistake is underestimating growth. People who once held influence assume the other person remains unchanged. They rely on outdated perceptions. They do not account for learning, maturity, or internal realignment. They believe that because they once had access, they always will. This assumption is fatal to their strategy. Loss of control is especially confusing when it happens quietly. There is no confrontation to frame it, no argument to explain it. The relationship simply feels different. Responses are shorter, engagement is minimal, influence dissipates, and without a clear event to point to, those who relied on control are left disoriented. They search for errors in execution rather than questioning the foundation. They assume something went wrong rather than realizing something ended. This delay in understanding prolongs their confusion. By the time they recognize what has happened, the distance is already established. This moment is rarely satisfying for those who sought dominance. There is no final victory, no dramatic closure, only the uncomfortable realization that their assumptions were flawed. They believed control was inherent. They believed silence meant submai. Sion. They believed composure meant compliance. Each belief proves false. What they never fully grasp is that the most decisive losses do not feel like defeats at first. They feel like quiet shifts in gravity. Influence fades, authority dissolves, and what remains is the unsettling truth. The control was never guaranteed. It was borrowed. True safety is often misunderstood as the absence of threat. People imagine peace as a condition where nothing harmful exists, where danger has been eliminated or neutralized. But this vision is unrealistic. Life is unpredictable. Risk is unavoidable. Safety then cannot depend on a world without danger. It must depend on perception, the ability to recognize danger when it appears. Clarity does not promise protection from every challenge. It offers orientation. It allows you to navigate complexity without losing direction. When you see clearly, you are not immune to difficulty, but you are rarely surprised by it. And surprise is what turns challenge into devastation. Seeing clearly means understanding patterns. You recognize how pressure is applied, how urgency is manufactured, how kindness can be performed, how silence can be strategic. This recognition does not make you fearful, it makes you prepared. You stop mistaking appearance for reality. You no longer assume that what feels safe is safe. This kind of clarity also reduces anxiety. When you trust your perception, you do not need constant reassurance. You do not wait for permission to feel uncomfortable. You respect your internal signals instead of overriding them. This self-trust becomes a form of stability that external circumstances cannot easily disrupt. Safety rooted in clarity is dynamic, not static. It adapts, it adjusts as situations evolve. Rather than clinging to fixed expectations, you remain responsive. When something shifts, you notice. When alignment fades, you saint EP back. This flexibility is far more protective than rigid certainty. Clarity also redefines confidence. Confidence is not believing that nothing will go wrong. It is believing that if something does go wrong, you will recognize it in time to respond. This belief reduces panic. It replaces fear with attentiveness. You move through life alert but not alarmed. Another aspect of this safety is independence. When you see clearly, you are less reliant on others to interpret reality for you. You listen, but you verify. You consider advice, but you decide. This autonomy prevents manipulation, because manipulation depends on confusion and dependency. Clarity dissolves both. Seeing clearly also sharpens boundaries. You no longer need excessive defenses because you are not constantly exposed. You choose where to engage and where to disengage. You enter situations with awareness rather than hope alone. This selectivity creates a buffer between you and harm. Importantly, clarity does not make you closed. You remain open to connection, opportunity, and growth, but with discernment. Openness without clarity invites danger. Clarity without openness invites isolation. The balance of the two creates resilience. As clarity deepens, your life simplifies. You waste less energy on what does not align. You spend less time repairing damage that could have been avoided. You no longer feel compelled to explain every choice. Your decisions become quieter, cleaner, more intentional. In this way, safety becomes an internal condition rather than an external guarantee. You are not protected because the world is harmless, but because you are attentive. You do not rely on luck, denial, or optimism alone. You rely on sight, and with that sight comes a calm certainty, not that danger will never appear, but that when it does, you will see it. And seeing at the right moment is often enough. In the end, what saves you is not force, nor cleverness, nor the satisfaction of being proven right. It is sight. Clear, quiet sight, the kind that develops slowly through patience, restraint, and an unwillingness to betray your own perception for the comfort of familiarity. What was meant to ensnare you failed, not because it was poorly designed, but because you were no longer who it was designed for. You did not escape by fighting harder. You escaped by seeing sooner. You noticed the pressure where ease was promised, the urgency where truth should have been patient, the performance where sincerity should have rested. You listened to the unease others dismiss. You honored the pause others fear. And in doing so, you stepped out of a future that was never meant to hold you.